your wife have any personal investment in those companies?
No.
Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes Mr. Crank from Colorado for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, the Department's FY27 military construction request includes plans for a new $250 million Space Force operations facility at Schriever Space Force Base. When constructed, this facility will support essential national security missions like Golden Dome, the National Reconnaissance Office, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance missions, and other Space Command requirements. With a projected workforce that includes over 2,600 high-paying civilian jobs, how will the department compete with the private sector to recruit and hire the highly skilled talent needed for those positions? And how will the department work with El Paso County, which is my county, and the city of Colorado Springs, who strongly supported this administration, by the way, to meet the growing needs of the Space Force?
Well, first and foremost, and I mean this, I would welcome your input. That's usually what I say when I'm on the road and in the field with commanders is, okay, you ask me, we meet with battalion and brigade commanders all the time. They ask me a really detailed question, and the first thing I say is, what do you think? And usually they know the problem set much better than us, and we take that feedback back to HQ and we action it. So I would welcome how we can ensure that that workforce is properly cared for and competitive, considering how important the Space Force is, which is doubled in this budget in size. Right. That domain of warfare we have to get right.
Yes. Okay. Mr. Secretary, sometimes here in Congress and on these committees, sometimes we do oversight, but sometimes we just overact. And there's been a little bit of that today. There's been some overacting. I would hope that when I look back on my congressional career, I've only been here a little while, I do know that when President Biden did some military operations, I supported him. I wasn't here, but I supported those operations because it's important to support the men and women of the military, and it's important to support our commander-in-chief when he makes the decision to deploy those troops. And I'd hope that when I look back on my career years from now, I will say the same thing, that I didn't choose what to support based on who the party was in the White House, but based on whether it was the best thing for our national security. And I hope that some of my colleagues who don't seem to hold that same standard would introspectively look at what they do. But I want to give you a minute. There's been a lot said about Iran and about the mission in Iran. And I think there's been a lot of misinformation here, and I want to give you the opportunity to correct the record.
Well, I appreciate that. We are fortunate to have a president who understands the nature of the threat we face from a nuclear-armed Iran. Full stop. We know what they say they would do, we know that they were pursuing, and we know that at their weakest moment, we had an opportunity to do something about it before they had a conventional shield of missiles and drones so large that they could never be contested. And then without inspections and from a bad deal, they could possibly race to a bomb. So the threat was right there in front of us. All it took was the courage to act, which no other president had done. And he gave us a clear set of objectives, which the chairman and I talked about from day one. In pursuit of ensuring that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon, you degrade their missile program, defeat their missile program, get at their conventional Navy, and ensure they don't have a defense industrial base so they can rebuild those capabilities. That's what we briefed from the podium. That's what we talked about. That's what we were focused on. And in service of that, had overwhelming military victories in pursuit of it. I mean, we've never seen an air campaign like what we did alongside the Israeli Air Force, not to mention the rescue of those 2 pilots and the professionalism of that joint force that went downtown twice, once in the day and once in the night, to leave no man behind. That is a call the commander-in-chief makes, and he had the guts to make it. And as a result, we're in a ceasefire, in the middle of negotiations, in a very strong place with a blockade that will ensure that when this is done, when a deal is set, it's a deal on the president's terms to ensure Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. That's a fight worth having. And if the American people remember 47 years, Americans remember 47 years of what the Iranians have done to us, targeting and killing Americans. If they had a nuclear weapon, they would use it. This president has unleashed his military to do something about it. We've had historic successes. And if we need to go at it again to ensure that success, we are prepared to. But we're hopeful over time that a deal will be compelled and compelled quickly. So this talk about endless wars or forever wars, the president points out rightfully what this town tolerated in Iraq and Afghanistan and Vietnam. That is not this. This is a discrete mission to pursue U.S. objectives, and we're doing it in a historic fashion.
I support this president's operation right now in Iran. I supported President Obama when he said he opposed a nuclear Iran and would do what was necessary to not to do that. And I supported President Clinton when he did the same. It's time to act, and I'm glad that this president did. Thank you.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Vindman from Virginia for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Earlier, Secretary Hegseth, you talked about flexible realism. So let's see if we can figure out how much of it is realistic and how much of it is just flexible. Secretary Hegseth, last year I asked you some questions about Indo-PACOM and threats in Europe, and you had a hard time answering those questions. I'm sure you prepped better this year, and I'm hoping you can answer some of these basic questions since now we are at war. Do you know what the price of oil is today?
I don't know where it's gone as this time of this hearing, but roughly $100 a barrel.
It's actually closer to 120, 117.
Well, it depends on the index you're looking at.
I'm looking at Brent. Do you know what the price was the day before of Brent, the day before we went to war?
It was certainly lower. You understand you're taking some economic risk. But I would
Yep,
note
a lot lower.
the energy
Thank you for
dominance
answering
this
my
president
question.
has
Let me-
unleashed
let
has
me
put
get
us in an
to my
incredible
question.
position.
Thank you. So it's $72, and so now we have a 62% increase. By the way, the department obviously will be paying those extra fuel costs. That's going to be not insignificant, but so will the American people. Now, at its narrowest point, how wide is the Strait of Hormuz?
I think it's about 12 miles, but I'd have to check.
It's 24 miles, but 12 miles is actually the relevant number because that's the navigable channel.
That's
So
the international water navigable channel point.
And do you know how many barrels of oil transited the Strait of Hormuz each day before the war started?
I don't know the exact number, but you're looking at over 100 oil tankers usually transited a day, or 120 a day would transport the strait.
Yeah, and so 20 million barrels a day, and right now they're at an 81% reduction. So it sounds like you've done your homework. You're tracking pretty well what the strategic situation is. So a couple of questions. Were you aware that if we struck Iran, that they would most likely close the Strait of Hormuz?
Of course, our department was prepared and planning for every possible contingency, being front and center as something they may do in a desperate state to attempt to
Which is what they've
facilitate
done,
some kind of control.
and I appreciate that. And earlier you told Mr. Moulton that this department has looked at all aspects of the risk and that the president got every possible perspective. And then recently you just said that the president did understand the risks and had the courage to undertake the endeavor nonetheless, and that's leadership, or words to that effect, pretty close. And so I just want to kind of give you the state of play right now. It's been 2 months of war. We have hopes for a resolution, but the war continues, really. Iran has closed the strait, and we've now gone in and blockaded their ports. 1/5 of the world's oil is unable to transit the strait, and the American people and the department are paying significantly more. And you also said that this is what the American people actually voted for. But actually, the American people voted for a promise not to get into Middle Eastern wars. And they voted for lower prices. And this is the exact opposite of what they got. So let me ask you this. The president ordered the strike, is that correct?
The president's been saying for over 30 years that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. So he's been
got it.
very clear as a
We're
position
talking
when
about
the American people voted for President Trump overwhelmingly. They voted for that
I got
position.
that, but the president ordered the strike. Is that correct?
Which strike are you referring to?
The strike on Iran, the war that we're in.
Oh, of course. I mean,
Okay.
he's the commander in
So
chief. He's
it
made
sounds like
the calls.
It sounds like you're blaming Daddy for the mess we're in, and I don't think he's going to be particularly happy with you.
I see what you're trying to do. There's no daylight in this administration on this
Mr. Secretary, I'm
campaign,
asking
and
the
I'm happy
questions. You've been
to
admonished
stand
for this
shoulder to shoulder
before.
with this administration.
Reclaiming my time. So let's shift gears. Last time we were here, I asked you if you'd apologize to the mother of an F-18 pilot whose son you endangered for sharing classified information on a signal chat. You refused. On March 1st, 6 Army soldiers, including a constituent of mine, were killed by an Iranian drone strike. Do you take any responsibility for those deaths?
I was there at Dover when they came back. Of course, I take
So was I.
responsibility for every aspect
Well, I
of this
appreciate
mission.
that because you also complained about the fact that tragic things happen. The news makes it front-page news. The press only wants to make the president look bad. Is it about the soldiers or is it about the president?